We started this year by talking about the fall of the Sony Spider-Man spin-off universe, also known as the SSSU. But at the same time, we've had a new universe that has been absolutely thriving. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here to talk about the Twisted Childhood universe, also known as the TCU, also known as the Pooniverse. With the limited release of Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare and the overall emergence of animated characters being twisted into the killers of low-budget slasher films, I really wanted to cover this topic. Even just while I've been researching and scripting this video, I realized that I had absolutely no clue how deep this rabbit hole goes. On top of that, it truly is crazy how many more of these films are getting announced. Towards the end of last year, we got confirmation that they would be releasing a Popeye horror movie. A couple weeks after that, I saw another post about the same Popeye horror movie, or at least, so I thought. As it turns out, these posts were not about the same movie. There were two separate announcements made about two separate horror films focused around Popeye, both within like 2 weeks of each other. If you're curious, one of them is titled Shiver Me Timbers, and the other is titled Popeye the Slayer Man. To be honest, none of this is surprising given why these horror films happen in the first place. Popeye became public domain in 2025, so anybody is able to use the character without fear of infringing on character rights. But anyways, enough about Popeye. With Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare, we have a third entry into an actual interconnected universe, so I figured now would be as good a time as any to talk about these movies. Why do they exist in the first place? Will this trend continue as more characters become public domain? How good is Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare? All of these questions will be answered in this video. I hope you all enjoy. It's important to understand how public domain works. When a character is created, there are many legal requirements for the maker of this character to follow in order to properly claim the rights of this character. This could apply to the visual representation of a character or the specific name that a character uses. There are technically ways to get around these laws, such as in 2023 when there was a horror movie released titled The Mean One, which is a horror movie about the Grinch. While the Grinch is not public domain until 2062, the filmmakers were able to skirt around copyright laws by claiming that the movie was parody. Parody is essentially using a limited amount of another author's copyright for the sake of comedy. Regardless, it worked, and they were able to release the movie without any huge issues. Although I do suspect that they would have run into problems had it been a larger release from a bigger studio. There are different ways that an entity can enter public domain. If a certain period of time has passed, things fall into public domain automatically. Basically, anything that you can find from 100 years ago is fair use. And of course, a copyright owner can choose to get rid of their copyright, and thus their creation would enter public domain. The biggest thing to understand is that as time goes on, more and more characters and more franchises will become public domain, and anyone can do whatever they want. Horror filmmakers are always looking for their next low-budget slasher to latch onto, and in this case, they use the appeal of childhood characters to try and gain the attention of the audience. I was shocked to find out that there have been hundreds upon hundreds of these childhood horror movies that have been releasing for multiple decades. I haven't even heard of 99% of these, and the sheer quantity is still shocking. If you do some of your own research, I guarantee you will find some surprises, but here are some of the hilarious and notable ones that I came across while looking into it. You could consider checking out the Alice trilogy, consisting of Alice in Horrorland, Alice in Terrorland, and Alice in Murderland. Any Shrek fans? You could watch the 5-minute long Fiona short horror film. I checked it out of sheer curiosity, and I have nothing to report. You have to see it to believe it. There's also Tooth Fairy 5 Drill to Kill, which just sounds absolutely pleasant. Mary Had a Little Lamb, released in 2023, with the tagline, "Its fleece was red as blood." There's another trilogy of films surrounding Humpty Dumpty, with The Curse of Humpty Dumpty, The Cult of Humpty Dumpty, and the madness of Humpty Dumpty. This rabbit hole goes way deeper than most people would realize, and you can spend literally hours just finding more and more of these films. Even though these movies have been coming out for many years, none of them have made waves in the public discourse. Most of them are direct-to-streaming films that nobody's ever heard about. But over the last couple of years, that has changed. Some of these films are getting theatrical releases that get extended because the movies are actually performing well at the box office. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the main event. It's time to talk about the Poohniverse. Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey was released in 2023. It somehow got a very small theatrical showing and was successful enough that they extended the release. It ended up grossing around $8 million at the box office, which might not sound like a lot, but we're talking about a film made for around $100,000. Just about a year later, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2 came out, also in theaters. As someone who has seen both movies, they actually improved so much in the sequel. They even made a really cool decision to have the first film be a movie within the second film that some of the characters watch. They edited the original to make it seem like more of a spoof, even having Pooh literally say, "It's Poohin' time." I'm not even joking. The second film only released for one weekend, and it grossed a similar amount to the first. Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare just had a limited release for 3 days earlier this week. It's directed by Scott Chambers, who plays Christopher Robin, and is also a central part of the team that creates these films. But these 3 movies are just a taste of what's in store. We have 3 more films hitting theaters this year to continue the Twisted Childhood universe. Our next film down the pipeline is Bambi: The Reckoning, which is rumored to be released very soon on February 7th. The trailer for this is wild. I'll leave it linked in the description if you want to waste a minute of your life. Next up is Pinocchio Unstrung. It has no confirmed release date, but we know that it's coming out in 2025. There's a really cool behind the scenes of the animatronic puppet that they used, and I'll be honest, it really does look amazing. It doesn't mean that the movie will be, but it's cool to see that they're actually putting some effort into these films. It's clear their budget and time dedicated to these movies just keeps increasing. And all of these movies will build up to the Poohniverse movie titled Poohniverse Monsters Assemble. I'm not even joking, that is a real title. We are actually going to see Piglet, Pinocchio, Peter Pan, and Winnie the Pooh riding Bambi all in one film. This cinematic event is coming in late October, so you still have time to catch up if you're behind on these films. We will be seated no matter what. Something else I wanted to tag along is that the studio making these films does not have any specific rights to these characters. If Blumhouse wanted to come along and give a larger budget to a director, there would be competition for the Poohniverse. Nobody is being held back, but Scott Chambers and the team at Jagged Edge Productions just happened to get there first. It'll be interesting to see if a bigger studio ever steps in, or if this niche stays in the hands of smaller studios. The Poohniverse movie does have a small sign of competition. Mickey vs. Winnie is slated to come out later this year. It's really hard to find details on the movie, and I've never seen a single soul discussing it. But the summary tells us everything that we need to know. A century after 2 convicts are swallowed by a cursed forest, a group of ex-reformed school survivalists reunite at their decaying hell camp. Their trip spirals into terror as the convicts rise as mutated, twisted childhood icons. I mean, just look at this poster. Amidst the Twisted Childhood universe, other competing films, and more characters bound to be public domain in the future, it begs us to ask an important question. What's next? To be completely honest, these horror movies are never going to stop. When Harry Potter becomes public domain, we will see Harry Potter start offing kids at Hogwarts. I can already imagine the low-budget posters promoting a movie like that. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, anything, literally anything can and will eventually become a horror movie. But for now, I think we'll see the continuation of the TCU. Hooniverse Monsters Assembled will probably make enough money for these films to continue. And honestly, who knows what they're gonna greenlight next. I do think this studio will continue releasing a couple films every single year, and I even think that they'll start adding post-credit scenes to these films, teasing what's coming next. As time goes on, we'll also definitely see an increase in competition. So far, we've only gotten a couple of films where Mickey Mouse is the killer of a horror movie. Screamboat actually comes out this month, so that can be added to that list as well. Mickey Mouse is a more popular character than somebody like Winnie the Pooh, so we'll definitely see more Mickey-focused films moving forward. Eventually, a larger studio will step up and have a bigger marketing budget to throw at one of these movies. And ultimately, when that happens, they're gonna make a lot more than some of these smaller studios would make releasing a film. But I don't think this competition is necessarily bad for the smaller studios. It might actually be to their benefit. For instance, Godzilla vs. Kong made good money, and if they keep releasing Godzilla films, they're still gonna do very well at the box office. There's a knockoff movie to Godzilla vs. Kong called Ape vs. Monster, and a lot of the reason why you would watch that is because you want to watch a spin-off of Godzilla vs. Kong. So both can exist, just one released by a larger studio and the other by a smaller one. Honestly, the biggest thing that I'm looking out for is these films becoming actually good and enjoyable movies. I say this about every single genre and every single franchise. If they can start releasing quality projects, then I'm all in. I will not watch 99% of the childhood horror movies that exist. But if we start to see an increase in quality like we had from Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 1 to the second film, then I'm going to keep watching. And if this trend does continue, I will unironically be sitting there for every single release within the TCU. Although in principle I'm not the biggest fan of childhood stories becoming twisted horror films, I can't help but be intrigued to research, discuss, and sometimes to actually watch these movies. It fascinates me that for the last couple of years, low-budget slasher films have found the niche of using animated characters. A niche that has actually turned a profit and spawned a dedicated universe. I don't really know where this stops, or if it will at all, but I'll be interested to continue following the journey as these films release. And I will, unironically, be sitting down to watch Pooniverse Monsters Assemble when it releases later this year. Something in me just longs to know how a movie like that could translate onto the big screen. And who knows, with their current track record, maybe it will be better than we're all expecting. There's one final question I need to answer. What are my thoughts on Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare? That's the reason why I'm making this video, and I've talked about all of these other horror movies, and not once have I mentioned my thoughts on the film. And the truth is, I haven't seen it yet, but I do have a ticket, so let's go check it out. What? I don't have the words. I don't have the words.